Hello, everyone. It is 8 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday, which can mean only one thing, another edition of Taxes and Retirement Live. Thank you for joining. I am your host, Andy Panko, owner of Tenant Financial and moderator of the Facebook group Taxes and Retirement. Thank you all for joining again. Got a great one tonight. Special guest who is a CPA expert in taxes and helps bridge the divide between tax professionals, or tax knowledge at least, and financial advisors. I know a lot of you in the group have asked, what is tax planning? What is financial planning? How do I find someone that does both? Or at least how do I get my financial person and my tax person to kind of work together and coordinate for the benefit of me, on my behalf? And so I have the right person here tonight to help talk about that. So without further ado, drum roll please, I introduce to you Stephen Jarvis. What's happening?
Not a whole lot. Thanks for having me, Andy.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So Stephen Jarvis is a member of the group. For those of you who haven't seen him around yet, he is a CPA. He's the owner of Retirement Tax Services, which tell us a little bit about your firm and what it does, Stephen.
Yeah, so Retirement Tax Services is a firm that I created actually in collaboration with some financial advisors, really targeted at, like you said, helping bridge that gap between financial planning and taxes. And really trying to go beyond simply tax preparation, which we do, and making sure that it's an ongoing relationship and resource, and not just, hey, let's file a 1040 and we'll talk again in a year.
Right, great. And for those of you that didn't pick up on it, he's also the co-host of relatively new podcast, Retirement Tax Podcast.
Yeah, which my co-host Benjamin Brandt is also in your Facebook group.
Yep.
And he is the host. He's a longtime host of Retirement Starts Today podcast. And so he's a financial planner. And we had the opportunity to meet and kind of come together and collaborate on this. And it's a consumer facing podcast that's him and I sharing thoughts on how individuals can do more to kind of take control of their tax situation.
Yeah, it's really great. So you're I think 6 episodes in, give or take one.
I think episode 6 came out today.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. And it runs bi-weekly. I've listened to all, I didn't catch today's yet, but I've heard the others. I mean, it's great stuff between you and Ben, a wealth of knowledge with tax and financial/retirement planning, put the two together, and they're relatively short and sweet, 20-minute, half-hour episodes thereabouts.
Yeah.
So definitely worth listening to. Again, the Retirement Tax Podcast, give it a search. You can't miss it. You'll definitely enjoy it. Right up the alley of everyone in this Facebook group. So thank you for you and Benjamin putting your time into this.
Definitely.
All right. Before we get going, so I have some dad jokes. Right, it's my thing. Let's see what we got here. A B flat, an E flat, and a G flat walk into a bar. Bartender says, "Sorry, I don't serve minors." You picking up what I'm putting down? I don't know anything about music. I had to look that up. And I was like, okay, I get it now. If you're ever locked out of your house, start talking to your lock calmly and clearly. After all, good communication is key. That one's bad. This one I like. I knew that one was bad. I want to see what your action would be. I like this one. I picked up a hitchhiker last night. He asked, "How do you know I'm not a serial killer?" I replied, "Well, the chances of 2 serial killers in one car is astronomical." And then I knifed him up, put him in the back. No, just kidding. I try to not do that. All right. One final bit of housekeeping. This video is only general explanations and education. It is not specific tax, legal, investment advice. Before considering acting on anything you see in this video, first consult with your tax, legal, or investment advisor, which neither myself nor Stephen are. We are just 2 fellows in dapper shirts. Stephen's more dapper than mine shirt.
Thank you.
Talking about tax and financial planning tonight. So, without further ado, Stephen, if you don't mind, I'd like to set the stage, and I'll defer to you. Can you just loosely define what is financial planning, what is tax planning, and maybe even what it's not? Is someone who simply does tax returns, is that tax and/or financial planning?
Well, there's a lot to that.
It's a big one, yeah.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because on the financial planning side, I feel like within the industry, and this comes up in your Facebook group, there's a lot of debate as to what a financial planner is, as to what financial planning is. It's this kind of hotly debated argument. On the tax side of the world, there isn't much of an argument, but I kind of wish there was, because on the tax side, we really just broadly defined doing taxes or being a tax professional as preparing tax returns. Mm-hmm. And so there's not really much debate, because that's what 99% of tax professionals do, is prepare tax returns. And unfortunately, that's also where they stop.
Right.
And so in my mind, tax planning is really kind of starts with this awareness that you have a lifetime tax bill. Retirement Tax Services, the name of the firm, really comes from this idea that at some point in your life, the IRS is going to expect you to pay your retirement tax, which is going to be a 6 or 7 figure bill that you don't get to get out of, but you can be proactive and hopefully kind of sand the rough edges off of. And so tax planning for me is being proactive and looking forward and saying, okay, if I'm intentional, I can do things to impact my tax bill over my lifetime.
Right. Yeah, that's great point. I think a lot of people know what a tax return preparer is and what he or she does, and they just generally refer to them as their CPA, even if the person's not a CPA. But someone who prepares taxes really doesn't do much more than take your inputs, your W-2s, your 1099s, your whatevers, punch them into some tax return preparation software, review for accuracy, run it by you, make sure you're cool with it, and file it with the IRS. That's really it. There's not planning per se. Some tax return preparers do go above and beyond and will say, hey, I noticed this. Maybe you can contribute, another $1,000 to your IRA this year, trim your tax bill a little bit this year, and things like that. But generally, it's not longer term. It's not 5, 10, 20-year projections. Like one of the most common questions in this group is, should I do Roth conversions? How much and when? Which is impossible to answer. And I say that all the time, or at least to answer precisely. But that's not something a tax return preparer does. And I would consider that tax planning. And that's really the intersection. That's sort of the epitome of the intersection between retirement-focused financial planning and tax planning. Like you said, you're trying to look potentially decades down the road at whatever your tax bill may be and figure out ways to try to minimize that. That's the marriage. So.
Yeah, and kind of unfortunately, that overlap does not always happen very well because there's the way the tax industry has kind of evolved over the last several decades compared to the financial planning industry. They're very different service models.
Yeah.
The tax world honestly is very transaction focused. It's hey, and we're almost at that time of year. Bring me all your documents. I'll put them all into a software. To your point, we'll get it filed and we'll move on and we'll talk again next year.
Yes.
There are CPAs out there, enrolled agents out there, tax preparers who will have a little bit more dialogue with you, but for the most part, it's let's get this filed and move on. And when your focus as a tax preparer is solely on compliance, if all you're focused on is how do I get it filed this year, usually what comes with that is that your focus is also how do I help my client pay as little in taxes as possible this year, which by the way is what most people are asking their tax preparer to do. Maximize my refund right now this year. Yeah. And so when a financial planner comes to them or a taxpayer comes and says, my financial planner told me I should do this Roth conversion, normally they're coming and saying, hey, I did this and it needs to be reported. And so the tax professional a lot of times isn't included in the discussion, which can be off-putting for them. Mm-hmm. But really what they're seeing is, oh, wait, we just went out of our way to pay more tax right now. And when you're only focused on 1 year at a time, that seems like a terrible idea. Right. Even though if we're looking at 5 or 10 years, the math can really make sense. The risks involved can really make sense. But if we're only looking 1 year at a time, then yeah, of course, doing a Roth conversion drives up our tax bill this year. It's by design. We are intentionally saying, yep, I want to pay the tax now so I don't have to pay more later, or so the IRS can't change the game on me later.
Right. Yeah. Quick unrelated question, but I thought this was interesting. Can a CPA practice in all states? Do we have to work with a CPA license in our state?
The magic answer to everything tax related is it depends. But a good tax professional is always going to follow up with something else. So for the most part, if you are licensed as a CPA, it is nationwide. Unlike lawyers who have to pass the bar in each state, and the exam is different in each state, the CPA is a national designation. There are a couple of exceptions to that. First and foremost are New York and Oregon. New York's very unique for all sorts of reasons. You have to be specially licensed and registered to be doing taxes in New York. And Oregon, if you're not a CPA, Oregon actually requires that you get a different license. Because in general, you can actually be a tax preparer without really any sort of designation. It's actually an incredibly low bar to be a paid tax preparer. It's kind of frightening.
It is scary, yeah.
Oregon is the one state that requires all tax preparers in their state to have a license of some kind. But in general, it doesn't necessarily matter what state you are based in compared to where the CPA is. But some states definitely have more complicated state income taxes. I'm in Washington State, we don't have state income tax at all. So if you are in Washington State, I work with a CPA anywhere, there's no state tax considerations anyways.
Sure.
But it's probably at least worth asking if you're going to work with someone out of state if they have experience in your state.
Okay. And just while we're on the topic regarding the eerily low bar for what it takes to become a tax return preparer. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think to do someone's return for compensation, all you need is a PTIN, a preparer tax ID issued from the IRS. The only requirements to get that, you have a pulse, so you're alive. I think you need to be 18.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you need to be a citizen, but you need a taxpayer ID at least, or a social.
I actually just renewed my P10 today, but I don't really think that hard about the different boxes because I meet all of them. But yeah, it's there's not much. There's a yes or no question there asking if you've been convicted of any crimes in the last 10 years, which I have a P10 from last year, so I don't know why it's 10 years. But it's just a yes or no question. They're not running a background check on me.
Right.
So.
And I think you need to be current on your own personal returns.
Yes.
And that's it. There's zero knowledge or experience requirement for any joker who's not a convicted felon to go out there and open up shop as a tax return preparer.
Yeah, in fact, the IRS every year puts out what they call their Dirty Dozen, which is some fun tax reading if you're ever curious. But it's highlighting frauds and scams that are tax related that are out there. And one of the things they typically highlight is fraudulent tax preparers, essentially. Since there is such a low bar, there are unfortunately people who will be out there pushing services that aren't legitimate tax preparers.
Especially fly by night, pop up in February and March, just bang out a bunch of returns for a couple months, close up and disappear. But yeah. And Jackie started listening to your podcast. Great show.
Well, thanks, Jackie.
Yeah, so kind. All right. So sorry, getting back to the core of the topic tonight. Financial planning, tax planning. I'm not even sure where to go with this exactly, but what words of wisdom do you have? Let's assume there's a client who works with an advisor, and that advisor manages investments and does some other general planning, when you should claim Social Security, should you take your lump sum pension or monthly payment, give a little guidance about estate planning. But when it comes to getting down and dirty in like the distribution planning and, how much IRA distribution should I take without triggering off Medicare surcharges, because once your income's over X amount, that happens. That's the tax planning. So for people who are kind of seeking that, not getting it from their financial advisor, their tax return preparer, like you said, is just doing this year's tax return, trying to minimize this year's taxes. Like, where do you go? I think this is a frustration lots of people in the group have.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the financial planning industry as a whole has realized there's a lot of value in tax planning. And the only reason I started with unfortunately is because they've realized it and taken it. Most advisors have taken it to the point where they list it on their website as, hey, I do tax planning, but they haven't taken it to the point where they're actually providing a lot of value around tax planning. There's actually some different companies that provide canned content for advisors, which is a great service. But so now you have tens of thousands of advisors who can put out websites that say, I do tax planning, and they have these really intelligent sounding articles that if you're just stumbling upon their website, you're going to assume they wrote and they know what they're talking about, but really they're pulling from a library and it's the same articles on 10,000 other websites. Right. So I'm hoping that we continue to move towards advisors actually taking taxes into consideration, because the question I always pose to advisors I work with is, can you give me an example of a financial planning recommendation you make that does not have a tax impact? And no one comes up with examples. Taxes impacts everything. So all that to say that if you work with an advisor who you don't feel is currently doing much around tax planning, your best place to start is really going to them and asking some more direct questions about tax planning. Just because they're not doing it yet doesn't necessarily mean they've somehow failed. It's not really been an expectation. And so I would start with, if you're working with an advisor, I'd start with your current advisor. Take them your tax return and say, hey, I would love for you to review my tax return and see if there's any insight that you can offer. That's one of the first things I work with advisors on who are part of retirement tax services is you need to be getting tax returns for every client every single year. And here are some things you should be looking for. So if your advisor hasn't asked for it, take it to them. Next time you meet with them, bring your tax return with you.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's a really clear, bright line test. If your advisor has never asked for your tax return, or if you offered it up for him or her to see, and they're like, "Nah, forget it," they very clearly do not do tax planning or anything even remotely close to tax planning. So that's a
Yeah.
great point to start with. Just curious, anecdotally, in the advisors you've come across and worked with, this may be a biased question because they probably want to get into tax planning, but like how many that you're aware of actually look for or look at tax returns for clients?
That's tough because this is clearly there's some selection bias here and some
Yeah,
self-reporting bias because for the most part, advisors I interact with are at least somewhat committed to tax planning because I make it very clear that's my whole thing is tax planning. And so, so the people who just don't care about it at all are probably staying away from me to begin with. And then there's a difference between the first time I asked that question and someone, a lot of times, oh, of course I asked for tax returns. Like, how could I make a recommendation on Roth conversion without looking at a tax return, which I agree with. But then as I talk with them a little bit more and come to find out, oh, well, maybe they get tax returns for some of their clients some of the time, or
Okay.
they got tax returns when they first came in, but they don't get them every year. So it's definitely very much the exception.
Right.
It is not the norm by any means.
Okay. Here's an interesting one. How valuable is it for the individual to try to do his or her own tax return to gain a better understanding for what the tax preparer and or financial advisor is doing for the individual?
So the way I read that question, that makes it sound like, hey, you've already got someone who's doing it. Should you step in one year and try it out yourself to try to learn something? I'm all for people learning more. A lot of what I work with advisors on is how do we better educate clients? How do we kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and kind of take some of the mystery out of it? Because for a lot of us, that's where some of the pain around taxes come from, is that it's just such a black box.
Yeah.
That I dump a bunch of tax forms on my tax preparer's desk. They put it into a magic software and a number comes out. I have no idea how I got from income over here to a tax bill over here. And so just trying to pull back the curtain a little bit on that. So if you have the motivation and desire to go through it yourself one time, yeah, by all means. If you're already working with a professional though, whether it's a tax preparer or a financial advisor, I would start with go to them with your tax return and have them walk you through it. If you're really new to this, I would still leverage that resource that you have because they're going to have insights for you beyond just getting through the return itself.
Right.
Because there are a lot of great tax prep softwares out there from a compliance standpoint, but most of them do little or nothing around tax planning. So they're going to prompt you with questions to get you through the basic things. But I see errors all the time. I'll give you an example of one that's relevant right now. For 2020, taxpayers who took the standard deduction, which was 90% of taxpayers, could still get a $300 deduction for charitable contributions. And for 2021, for married filing jointly filers, it's $600. So you would think that would be an easy one, that somewhere in the software that would get prompted, that if you didn't fill that in, there'd be a red flag. All those kinds of things. I spend a lot of time reviewing tax returns for financial advisors and providing them insight. And I've come across returns where I can see in the background, hey, there were charitable contributions. They were at the standard deduction, but that line's blank. Yes, I get that it's only a $300 deduction, so maybe $100 in taxes. But for me, I don't like leaving the IRS a tip. So I'll take that $100.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And David Fultz, my view, I don't think clients have to do their own returns. I think it's good that they at least loosely understand what goes into them, so you understand what's going on. Do you have to do it to gain that appreciation and knowledge? Not necessarily. I work with folks, some do their own returns, some don't. Some have me do it, some have other people do it. Nonetheless, I always require, request to see everyone's returns. But who does it? I don't particularly care. I'll still nonetheless review it to see if something jumps out as like wrong or whatever. But yeah, I don't think you have to do your return. If you want to, by all means, go ahead. Can't hurt. Maybe it could hurt, but at least you'll learn a lot in the process. General question, so it may be hard to answer, but and this is kind of the crux of tonight, I guess. What advice do you have to find a tax planner versus a tax preparer?
Yeah, I wish I had a better answer for this. It's a tough lift because the way the industry has kind of grown up, it's just not the emphasis. And so if you're So there isn't a tax planner designation, right? And so even the CPA designation doesn't inherently mean that someone does taxes. That's a
Right.
common misconception. A lot of us think of CPAs as tax preparers. It turns out that's only a quarter of the exam. And so even as you go find tax preparers, really getting a solid idea of whether they're going to do planning or not is going to come down to the questions that you ask as you're kind of evaluating whether that relationship is going to work for you. And asking questions like, what does your service include after the return is filed? Or when will we meet to start talking about planning opportunities for next year? And for some tax preparers you talk to, those questions are just going to get kind of a deer in the headlights response. Like those are foreign ideas to a lot of tax preparers.
Right.
But just even asking some of those simple questions up front will at least help you know what you're getting into.
Yeah, that's that deer in the headlights thing, and I don't mean that in a demeaning term sense of the word, but there are a lot of tax preparers in the group, in the Facebook group, and they know much more about doing tax returns than I do, especially the more complicated stuff when it comes to the planning, the tying it together with broader retirement related financial topics. There a lot of people learn a lot in this group because it's foreign to them. They do returns, they know returns exceptionally well, but the planning is kind of what's missing.
Well, and I feel like I should take just a second and say that tax preparation is an incredibly valuable service. So like you said, we're not trying to demean people who do tax preparation in any way. It's just trying to distinguish between the value proposition for tax preparation and then tax planning. Unfortunately, the IRS tax code is incredibly large and complicated, and none of it is based on logic. It's not written by accountants. It's written by Congress, and it was written in pencil. And so having someone who can help you make sure it gets reported correctly is really important. One of the things I tell advisors quite often, we can use Roth conversions as an example. If it doesn't get reported correctly to the IRS, it may as well have not have happened. And so we can't discount or disregard the importance of tax preparation. This is really more about trying to take it a step further and making sure we're getting value out of the process.
Yeah. Vaguely similar question. What can a good tax planner do for you, and how do you evaluate? I mean, I have some thoughts, but I'll let you give your view on this. You kind of touched on it with the last question, but.
Yeah. So in my mind, a good tax planner is going to help you sand off the rough edges of your lifetime tax bill. This because compliance still needs to be a huge priority, right? This isn't like sarcastic air quotes tax planning. We're not talking about offshore accounts or things that we just hope the IRS ignores. We're talking about using legitimate and acknowledged tax strategies to just be proactive and intentional. That the way the tax code is set up, we have a lot of choices we can make, and most people kind of are just, I don't know, almost trained into this thought process of taxes are what they are, so let's just move on. But that's just not the case. So a tax planner is going to help you understand what those choices are and help you analyze and make recommendations for what choices might make the most sense in your situation.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think, now I'm biased because this is what I do, but I think a financial planner is likely better suited to also be a tax planner for you, as opposed to your tax preparer being better suited to be the tax planner, because there are, so as Stephen mentioned, virtually every aspect of your financial life has tax implications. Your financial planner, he or she, is much more likely to know all that stuff about your pension options, your Social Security options, your house, your rental property if you have one, your various investment accounts, how they're invested, where they're invested. Your CPA simply doesn't have and won't get most of that info throughout the course of that relatively transactional once a year meeting you have. So the planner is better suited to have that info, to know which choice you make here impacts what other things, and that's the spot to layer over this sort of tax efficiency umbrella to make sure all these decisions work in a coordinated, cohesive fashion with tax minimization in mind. Not to say a tax preparer can't take it upon himself or herself to learn that info about you, but it's just not what they do. Like you said, they're kind of do returns. But it is still not defined at all, not even vaguely defined, but not defined at all what exactly tax planning is. Like it's kind of this conceptual thing. You and I can give examples of what we think tax planning is, but there's no standardized definition of a tax planner does X, Y, Z. You can find a tax planner here on this website. it just doesn't work like that. And the latter part of this question, how do you evaluate? I think you touched on this, Stephen. It's the questions you have to ask to kind of tease out of this person. What do they know about taxes? What could they potentially do for me? And what advice is that? Do you have any tips? Like, where do you even start? How do you try to find someone who you would call a tax planner? And then what questions do you ask to that person to try to figure out, are they really a tax planner? And if they are, are they going to be able to provide what I'm looking for?
Yeah, it's certainly not an easy process. We are starting to see more of a trend of people going from the tax preparation world into the financial planning world, which I think is incredibly valuable. But what you'll see is that they'll often leave behind the tax preparation. I was actually on the phone with a couple of advisors today who, between the two of them, they've got 30 plus years of tax preparation experience, and they said, you know what, we really enjoy the proactive year-round relationship of being a financial planner. Let's move towards that.
Yeah.
But as far as questions that you should be asking or how to find a good tax planner, I would still start with professionals you're already working with, if you are, and start prompting these discussions. If they aren't bringing them up themselves, bring them your tax return. Ask them on the tax preparation side, if you're looking for a new tax preparer and you want to see if they're going to do any planning as well. First thing I would start with is, all right, but between when you file my return and and September 30th, or pick a date in the fall, what does your service model include? What kind of communication should I expect from you? What a tax preparer does outside of those deadline seasons, those busy seasons, really indicates whether they're focused on the proactive piece of it or not.
That's a great point. If their annual work schedule kind of stops on April 15th and then October 15th, extension time, and that's it, then they're probably not doing real planning per se, right?
Well, and to your point about financial planners often being in a better position to help with that, I would agree with that in large part just because the service models are so different. Because a lot of in the financial planning industry, it seems like the typical kind of dream is your 100 perfect clients, right? That's what a lot of advisors are shooting towards. Is I want 100 clients that are my ideal niche or whatever it might be. And so you see more or less than that, but that's kind of the benchmark. On the tax preparation side, I know tax preparers who will individually prepare 1,500 to 2,000 returns in a single year. And so they had these huge pushes at a particular time of year, and then they disappear for a few months to recover from half working themselves to death. And so they haven't put themselves in a position, and they're not charging for their services in a way that they feel empowered to do that. And so it does have to be a shift, which honestly is why we just took a completely different approach to trying to change how tax preparation can work. And we leverage through Retirement Tax Services, we leverage that relationship with financial advisors. So right now we actually only take on tax preparation clients who work with an advisor in our community, because then we know they're getting, they already have that year-round relationship, and they're going to get more of from us. But they're going to expect something different than, hey, let me call you in February, drop off my documents, we'll file it in April, and then we'll talk again next year.
Right. Yeah, so that's exactly what you and your firm do right now. I know this doesn't help those watching, it doesn't help clients directly because you work with advisors for the benefit of their clients. But if someone does have an advisor who doesn't quite do tax planning, or they know their limitations of tax planning, they enlist you and your services, and then that kind of rounds out the picture where you're kind of the outsourced tax planner, right? For lack of a better term.
We look at it as co-sourcing because we collaborate with the financial advisor the whole way around. But yeah, if you've got members of your group who work with the financial advisors not doing a lot around tax planning, sure, please send them my way.
Yeah, Retirement Tax Services. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just one other thought I had when someone asked, what was it? How do you find it, and how do where do you go, or whatever? There are some advisor search tools where there will be a filter where you can select like what town is the advisor in, or areas of specialization. And in areas of specialization, you may be able to see tax management, tax planning, whatever that particular tool calls it. So for example, I reference all the time in this group the Garrett Planning Network, which is a bunch of advisors, independent advisors who all offer hourly or limited engagement services. You can search by tax planning there, or tax focus, or whatever it's called. Now, that's still not going to be a black and white filter. You're still going to have to ask the questions. You need to at least be educated enough to know what you're kind of looking for, and to know the questions to ask, to kind of needle that person, to be like, ferret out of them. Do they seem to have the knowledge? Are they talking about the things you expect them to be talking about? Do they have any, initial, not recommendations, but kind of thoughts that sound like things you can benefit from? That's really how you go about finding a tax planner. There's not a black and white search otherwise.
There are financial planners out there who will do tax preparation in-house. That either they've got the background or they've got someone on staff that will do it. So that's one way to, again, it's not super black and white, because I've worked with advisors who have tax prep in-house, but they still treat it as a completely separate service. It just happens to be under the same roof.
Yeah.
But that might be at least an easy way to start the conversation with one of those advisors to say, oh, I see you do, tax preparation in-house. What's the overlap between those services? How do you collaborate? What does that mean for me from a planning standpoint?
Yeah. And one other thing I want to add, while it's nice to see a person, a tax planner, a financial planner, have a tax-specific license or designation, such as Steven's CPA, Certified Public Accountant. Me, I have an EA, which is IRS Enrolled Agent. Nice to see, but not necessary. There's a lot of really sharp, really knowledgeable folks. One in the group, David Myers, I don't know if he wants the attention or notoriety, but he knows taxes cold. I'd say he does tax planning. He knows his stuff. He's neither a CPA nor an enrolled agent, yet I'd be fully comfortable and confident in saying he can do tax planning really well for people. So how do you find Dave and people like him? Like, that's why I was saying, you go to these search tools, kind of just pick people, ask questions, and hope you come across the right person, which is sometimes a shot in the dark, but it's the best we have for now. Anyway, it's an interesting one. How to ensure the rate charged for tax planning services is fair and reasonable, not basis on the amount in any accounts. Part of the, my thought is tax planning isn't really its own standalone thing. It's like folded into whatever other broader service the person has. So I don't know if there really is an answer for this.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, just like you see so many different approaches to financial charging for financial planning. I know that comes up in the Facebook group at times. This is kind of a soft answer, but it really needs to come back to how does the fee compare to the value being added? As I look at the way we charge for tax planning, we have a monthly subscription it's an annual relationship you pay for on a monthly basis. That includes the tax preparation and tax planning. And it's not tied to the amount of investments they have or anything like that.
Okay.
If we got into unique or complex situations, that might be out of scope and it might turn into an hourly rate. But really on the tax planning side, unless you're, buying or selling a business or into complex real estate transactions, you've got foreign tax considerations. If you're in these very complex areas, you're going to need a specialist and you're going to have some large projects. But for the most part, you're looking for an ongoing resource who's going to routinely review what you have going on and provide insights back to you. And so, the amount in your investment accounts for the tax planning itself, no, those aren't tied together. But quite often, if you're getting tax planning through a financial advisor in particular, you're not going to see it listed separately on their billing or their invoice. It's included in what they do.
And however they structure their fee, it's just simply lumped into part of that, right? The tax planning.
Yeah, and part of the reason for that is the advisors who are really committed to tax planning. Honestly, it's not an a la carte optional service. It's either you're coming to them and they're going to do that along with everything else they do because they know it's an integral part of a good plan, or you're not a good fit for that advisor.
Yeah, that's exactly. It's part and parcel with everything else.
Yeah.
Do you know of any DIY tax planning tools for retirement?
Not that are consumer focused.
Okay.
Not yet, at least. I know it. I've got some advisors who are interested in trying to tackle this. Software development is an incredibly intensive process,
Right.
And so it would be nice to think that we could easily roll something out. Take all the different spreadsheets that advisors and CPAs and EAs have made in their home offices and just roll them out for the public to use, but. Unfortunately, it's a pretty intensive process. And so I don't know if one kind of, it's not a perfect workaround, but early in my career, before I'd really gotten further into this, just for my own personal situation, I would just take the tax prep software I'd used the year before and just start updating it for what I thought my income would be the next year, just to do kind of 1 year at a time to do projections or look at, am I on track for withholding, things like that. And so you can kind of, you can kind of use the tax prep software as a here's what the next year looks like, but that doesn't get you very far out. That's better than nothing, but that doesn't get you 5-10 years.
Right. There are some consumer facing general financial planning, retirement planning tools like New Retirement. And this isn't a paid advertise, just it's one that I happen to be aware of. They don't do tax planning per se, but in some of the tools and features they have, you can look at the projected, very, very rough estimated, assumed kind of long-term projections of if I do a conversion now versus not, what's the potential impact on my required minimum distributions, for example. So that sort of can get you there, but there's just way too many variables. And I say this all the time, I feel like a broken record. Trying to quantify the value of Roth conversions, how much should you do and when? That answer is so heavily dependent on what you assume future tax rates will be, which nobody knows. What you assume future stock and bond market returns will be, which nobody knows. What your own longevity and health circumstances are going to be, which you probably don't have you may know to some extent, but whatever. What your expenses are going to be year to year. So I don't know. I'm getting off track here, but I feel like I know when I see when conversions are warranted for someone. Outside of that, trying to really quantify is tough, and I don't know where I'm going with this. I'll just stop because I'm rambling now. But
what this is only sort of related to what we're talking about. But one of the things I would throw out there especially for any of the DIY tax planners out there, but even if you're working with a professional, if you're not already in the habit, get in the habit of making sure you are actually looking at how much of your money the IRS kept. So for 2020, the 2020 1040, it's line 24. That's your total tax liability. A lot of people get hung up on, did I get a refund or did I make a payment? And we pretty much lose all context for whether we're being intentional and proactive or not. Because in fact, you can get a refund and still have an underpayment penalty, which that's always a fun situation to see. But I've worked with advisors, I've worked with taxpayers who, we go to talk about tax planning, they'll say, oh, no, I'm fine. I get a refund every year. I don't really, I can get at all 15,000 members of your Facebook group, I get every one of them a refund next year. That's not hard. That's not some magic trick. You're just overpaying the IRS and they hopefully eventually return it to you.
Right.
But I'll talk to those people, I get a refund every year, but they can't tell you how much tax the IRS actually kept. And it'll be tens of thousands of dollars and they have no perspective for it. And so when someone says, hey, we should do some intentional tax planning, they're like, that's not important to me because I get a refund every year. Those aren't the same thing.
Exactly.
So make sure you really know how much of your hard-earned money is the IRS keeping every year.
I heard you say once before, and I never thought about it this way, but taxes are people's biggest line item expense in life. Right. Yeah. Almost always. Yeah. Whether it's in retirement or in your working years, it's your biggest line item expense. So to the extent you can minimize that, great. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of people just don't really have an appreciation for it because we just don't pay attention to it on our tax return.
Yeah. Which I get, kind of ignorance is bliss. But what are your thoughts about this? I always did my own tax returns, but this year I did a Roth conversion. Should I hire a CPA to prepare my return this year?
For DIY tax preparers, honestly, I think it's the best practice to every so often find someone else to do it, just to see if there are things you don't know that you don't know. The fact that you did a Roth conversion on its own, as far as the reporting aspect of it, that's really not too complicated to put into your return. There's usually a little bit more analysis or assessment that goes into deciding how much. But once you've done it, once we get past the end of the calendar year, then we're just reporting it. So that in and of itself might not be the thing that pushes you to getting a CPA to prepare your tax return. But honestly, it's a good idea from time to time anyways.
Yeah, that would make sense. Does a good tax planner give you advice on how to minimize taxes, such as offshore accounts, variety of trusts, foundations? I guess broader question, what exactly do tax planners do? But I guess this person's question, specific reference to these three different things.
So if we go with, does a good tax planner give you advice on how to minimize taxes? Yes, most definitely. They should be proactively looking for ways for you to minimize the amount of tax you owe. I don't get into offshore accounts. I leave that to other people. That's just not really where I focus my time or energy. I really try to just focus on what's applicable to more people. But yes, there are certainly a lot of other opportunities out there. There are different kinds of trusts. That becomes a legal question as well. So it's nice to have a team that you are working with. As far as foundations, you know, if we're talking about charitable giving, some of that comes down to what your charitable inclinations are. You're never going to come out ahead by giving to charity if you weren't already planning on it, but there are definitely more tax efficient ways to do it. And those are definitely the kinds of things that a tax planner should be helping you with, should be looking at your return and saying, oh, okay, great. I see that you're giving to charity, but we're was looking at a tax return this last week that the taxpayer was giving about $20,000 to charity every year. But since the standard deduction is, you know, last year it was $24,800, they had maybe like $5,000 or $6,000 of mortgage interest. And so they were giving $20,000 to charity every year, but they were really getting basically zero tax benefit because you get the standard deduction anyways. And that's a hard concept for a lot of people because we've just been trained to think that, oh, if I give to charity, I get a tax benefit.
Right.
And so they were giving all this money to charity every year and getting zero tax benefit from it. And so, yes, a good tax planner should be saying, hold on a second. Obviously, you give because you care about this organization, but would it be all right if we looked for tax efficient ways to do this? If nothing else, so you can just give more to that organization.
Right. Yeah, that's a great way to frame it. And my thoughts about that comment is, you know, could a good tax planner help you minimize taxes on those three things? Like Stephen said, minimize taxes. Yes, that's sort of front and center, the overarching goal of a tax planner. The specifics of what he or she focuses on, I think that's going to depend because, like you said, Stephen, you don't really touch offshore things. It's just not your wheelhouse, whether by choice or otherwise. Don't know, doesn't matter. But same with me. My focus is people in or near retirement and the typical things that come into that person's life: Roth conversions, pensions, Social Security, investment accounts, houses, you know, potentially selling a rental. Those are things I chose to focus on because I know it's who I want to work with, situations I'm going to see. Offshore stuff, like I don't touch international taxes. I know my limitations and I know when there's a whole other area of specialization involved to do that. So while people who help you reduce taxes via creative use of trusts, via offshore accounts, they're a tax planner in the sense of the word as much as I am, but we do very different areas within that tax planning universe, if you will. So
yeah, I constantly tell people that, you know, tip your server, not the IRS. That's my advisor facing podcast. That's my sign off. I am all for only paying what you owe. But along with that, I also 100% support compliance. And so if I have people come to me and say, hey, do you think we could do this and the IRS wouldn't notice? All right, we're not a good fit. Like there are gray areas within the tax code. And when we get into those, good example would be how much of a salary should you pay yourself if you have an S corp, right? There is not one hard, fast number. And so, great, let's have a discussion of what that should be and how we should support that or document it. And if you want to take a more aggressive approach, or if one of my clients wants to take a more aggressive approach, as long as it's not, in my opinion, just completely flaunting the rules, great. As long as you understand the risks, yeah, I'm all for that. But if there's a line that every professional is going to have where you say, you know what, if we're crossing this line and getting into, hey, we hope nobody notices, that's not something I'm going to touch.
Right. I agree. It's great to hear you say that. There are a lot of people who will gladly touch that and take people's money to do that return. And they're probably those fly-by-night shops that they, you know, set up on the middle. It's a corner of some seedy neighborhood that used to be some deli 2 weeks ago. Before that was like a off-track betting place and whatever. I'm just picturing like gritty areas of New York right now and these pop-up shop tax return preparers that come and go around the spring.
Well, I try to do a lot around educating people on common tax myths. And one of them is this idea that if I filed my return and it was accepted by the IRS, it must have been okay. And so if you're not familiar with the tax filing process, when you e-file a return, it gets sent to the IRS. And then usually within days, if not weeks, you get a notice that says the IRS has accepted your return. That's the word they use. And all that means is that it came through and the software didn't immediately flag anything. The IRS still has a pretty long window where they will go back and look at things and say, wait, nope, that's not right. And the IRS only audits a very, very small percentage of returns as a whole. So even if something doesn't get flagged for years, that doesn't mean it was right. That just means it didn't get noticed. Right. So again, to me, it's very important to say, okay, are we doing something that maybe is in a gray area, but here's our logic and we can support it. And that I'm going to feel, if the IRS does ever ask questions, I'm going to feel good going and giving them my explanation. Or is it, hey, we just hope nobody notices, and that's just not what I'm here for.
Yeah. Here's we sort of touched on all these except one word is standing out to me, and I'll see if you pick up on this word as I did. Looking for someone who can do certified financial planning, tax preparing, tax planning, retirement planning, and can also handle audit. Do such people exist? I thought I need a firm with multi-specialists, but don't have that kind of budget. So we already sort of touched on financial planners, financial advisors, audit, handle audit. What does that mean to you in the context of this question?
Yeah, I'd be curious if that's handling IRS audit. Is this a financial statement audit? Is this a compliance audit? Audit is a very, very broad word. So I'd be curious if there's more context there. There are starting to be more large national accounting firms that offer everything you're talking about. Yes, the budget is going to need to be a little bit bigger to afford that. But typically, if you need that many different aspects, I mean, especially thinking of the audit side of it, you're in a more complex situation. But the way you've listed this, I mean, CFP, tax preparing, tax planning, retirement planning, I mean, yeah, you can definitely find people who will do most of those. I mean, Andy is a great example of that, right? I mean, Andy, you're not doing the tax preparation, but tax planning, retirement planning, that there are more and more CFPs who are broadening what they include under their definition of financial planning and touching on these different elements.
Yes. So I wasn't going to say me, but since you did, I'll run with it. I check most of these boxes in that I'm a CFP and I do financial planning focused on retirement and tax planning, meaning I have a strong focus on helping minimize tax out of it. I can also do tax returns. I have a separate business that I do that through. I consciously do not do hairy, complicated returns, but if you're relatively straightforward, I can. The audit thing is where, and like Stephen mentioned, depending what type of audit you're referring to, how complex, what's involved, that you probably won't find a financial retirement planning focused person like myself doing that. I can. The enrolled agent license I have allows me to represent people in front of the IRS, but I don't want to. That's a whole other business that I want to get into. So you may need to, depending what your specific needs are and how involved, you may need to split this up and go to different places, or there may be some huge, one-stop shop place that's not going to be cheap.
Well, and in part to answer this question, and kind of circle back to earlier questions about how do you kind of find a good professional to work with. In my opinion, and Andy, feel free to push back on this. If you're working with a good financial planner and you come to them for your specific situation and say, hey, I have these needs, can you help me? Even if their answer is no, they can't personally, if you have a good professional in your corner, they're going to help you find the answers. That might be helping you, pointing you to other professionals, or working with and then collaborating, sharing information where it's relevant. That's not going to be universally the case. There's going to be situations where it's just completely outside of what they do.
Yeah.
But ideally, your financial planner can be the kind of in the driver's seat of your financial life, whatever analogy you want to use for how they head that up. But I would like to say the same thing about tax preparers, but it doesn't happen as often. My personal approach is that if I have a client come to me, if I can't personally perform the service they need, I'm going to take responsibility for seeing that they are still served, even if it's through another professional.
Yeah, great point. And I wholeheartedly agree. A good financial planner / advisor should do a lot of things for you: general planning, tax planning, ideally, investments, whatever, but also be kind of quarterback, for lack of a better word, to help you coordinate if and when you do need legal documents drafted up and executed. A financial planner cannot do that unless he or she is also a licensed lawyer in your state. That doesn't mean the advisor can't help you find and or coordinate and liaise with an estate planning attorney. Same thing with folks who sell insurance. I intentionally chose to not get insurance licenses, not because I don't think insurance is important, because I don't want to be the one selling it, getting the commission for it. But I realize it's important, insurance and annuity. So I have a network of providers and other folks I can work with to help people get insurance. And same thing with mortgages, et cetera. And tax professionals. If and when there's a return I don't want to do or I can't do, I will gladly enlist someone like Stephen or folks like him to be like, hey, can you help me out with this? Because you're the specialist in it and I know my limitations.
So that could be a question you add to your list if you're evaluating a new financial planner and want to know if they do tax planning. say, hey, if I get a notice from the IRS, what would you suggest I do with it? And if their answer is anything other than, go ahead and bring it to me and we'll work on it together, that might be a red flag that they're not that interested in tax planning.
Yeah, great point. Bit of a change of direction here, but I thought this was interesting. Clearly directed to you, Stephen. Do you feel like the university financial planning programs are doing a good job of covering the tax domain for their students? I wish professors would be more willing to bring in an expert like you or Andy for a 1-hour session like this. I just got done with my PFP, like personal financial planning, master's program at Kansas State. So I don't know how involved you are with knowing the curriculum or working with folks who have gone through the formal university programs, but any insight into what they do with regards to taxes and tax planning?
I don't have a ton of insight other than I did get connected with a professor at Boston College this year who we're going to collaborate on doing just what you're suggesting, Jackie. If you have somebody at Kansas State that you'd like to connect me to, I've actually been an adjunct professor myself in the past, so it's an area that I'm passionate about, and so I'm happy to collaborate where it makes sense and where people are excited to be talking about it, because I think there's a ton of value in having working professionals come share their experience. But I think the really dedicated emphasis on financial planning programs is a more recent phenomenon. And I spent the early part of my career more kind of focused in CPA land, for lack of a better way to put it. And it's only been more recently that I've been really focused on the financial planning industry. So I don't know that I have that I'm the best one to ask about the financial planning programs.
Got it. And I believe this is in response to us just asking, to clarify what does audit mean. So tax audit, and I guess we sort of touched on that, right? Unless the firm specifically is in the business of helping represent you and work through audits. The typical,
That's a great question if you're vetting a tax preparer, that's a great question to ask is, if this return you're preparing gets audited, is that part of the service you already provide? Is that, what would that look like?
Yeah.
So, because I mean, for us, we see an IRS audit as a potential for anyone, whether you're doing it perfectly right or intentionally doing it wrong. Everyone has the wonderful opportunity of being selected for audit at some point. It won't happen to most people, but it can. And so for us, that's just built into our service to clients, is that at least the initial evaluation of what that's going to look like, that's just included in the price we charge our clients, because we never want our clients to be afraid to pick up the phone and call us. And we don't ever, especially for work that we're doing, ultimately it's the taxpayer's tax return. But if I'm signing it, I'm going to take pride in that and stand by it and be involved in seeing that through if questions came up from the IRS.
Great segue. So you said, and I think this is important for people to know, even if you have someone prepare your return, it's ultimately the taxpayer, the person's responsibility to know what's in there, to attest that it's accurate to the best of their knowledge, because it's their return. You're just a helper in doing it, right?
Yeah. So the person signing the return definitely has some professional liability associated with this. They don't just get to say, "Oh, well, it's not my return." Right. But yes, you are still responsible for your tax return.
Okay. Which this is why I thought it was a good segue into this question. Having taxes done by a CPA, does it increase a few points on the no audit side? Or I guess, does it help minimize your chances of being audited if a professional preparer returned it for you as opposed to you doing it yourself? Any idea?
So I haven't personally worked for the IRS. I've talked to a lot of people who have and do, and it's kind of a moving target as far as what raises red flags for IRS audits. There is some small percentage that just happen randomly. So no matter what, that is a possibility. But trying to decide what's going to increase your risk for audit, to me, is a secondary concern, because I want to start with let's do this correctly. So I don't know how much that increases your chances or decreases your chances as professionally prepared. Yeah. But the more important piece is, are the other things in your return likely to raise red flags?
And I would love to know what the algorithm is, what those flags are. I mean, I keep hearing just generic terms that, if you're self-employed or if you have high income, there's a few things that make you higher risk. But I'd love to be able to know how they quantify that risk and what specifically are the flags and to what extent. I'm sure they keep that close to the chest and don't make that publicly available. But
yeah, trying to quantify how much it changes your risk is really difficult. You can definitely find information on there on the types of things that will raise red flags. So for all of our clients that we work with, we have what's called Irs Form 8821, which allows taxpayers to designate someone on their behalf to get notices from the IRS. And the software we use to pull that information from the IRS will actually throw out kind of red flags for potential audit risk. But again, it's not saying, and this is a 10% chance and this is a 15% chance. It's just saying that these different categories. Like for example, I know that Schedule C income makes that list of things that increase your risk of potential audits. Again, I can't put a number to that, but there's just more subjectivity involved there, as opposed to if I'm just a W-2 employee that made some HSA contributions and I don't really have anything exciting in my return. That's a lot lower risk than, hey, I have a Schedule C and I can just write in here what my expenses were.
Exactly. Boatload of deductions for expenses. Yeah. I guess one last thing about tax returns. I know this wasn't really the focus of tonight, but people seem to be interested. And you mentioned this, is the person who signed off on your IRS, on your tax returns, responsible for your return, i.e. representing you if audited by the IRS. So you as a CPA, you're the paid preparer. Again, it's ultimately a taxpayer's responsibility for the return, but you, being the preparer who did it, have some, I don't want to say recourse, but some responsibility. What is that responsibility? What's your involvement if and when it gets audited and or something's incorrect?
So this is a really interesting area, because me signing your tax return doesn't actually give me permission to represent you in front of the IRS. There's separate forms for that. And so you have to separately give a professional permission to talk to the IRS on your behalf. And so it's more of a legal question, the extent to which the preparer is liable or how they get drug into that if something were to get audited. It would really depend on the facts and circumstances of that specific situation. But you can't just assume that just by the fact that they signed your return means they're immediately obligated to help you if an audit were to come up.
Yeah, I think by default they're not. I mean, they probably should, especially if they messed it up. But they can do your return, sign it, submit it for you, and no obligation to do anything else after that point, right? Unless it's like an egregious miss, and then you can sue them, and they kind of have to get involved. But
yeah, and that's certainly going to be considered as the audit goes through. But yeah, like I said, it ultimately is still your tax return, and to the point where, like I said, it's a completely separate form. But you have to grant power of attorney to a CPA or enrolled agent for them to be able to talk to the IRS on your behalf or to represent you.
Yeah. Okay, we're getting to top of the hour. If anyone else has additional questions for Steven, throw them in quickly. I promised him I wouldn't keep him substantially more than an hour. So just random related something talked about. Any idea why the IRS hasn't strengthened the requirements to become a tax preparer, since the current standards are indeed so lame? It's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I can't argue with that description. So the AICPA, which is the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, and the governing body for CPAs, along with some of the larger accounting firms in the country. This is high on the list of lobbying efforts, but like tax laws themselves, it comes down to lobbying and what people want to prioritize or not. And so I wish I had a better answer for you than that, but it's this balance between people's feelings on regulations in general versus protecting consumers. I know it's been a topic that's kind of gotten increasing scrutiny from the industry as a whole to try to push for that, because honestly, for those of us who are licensed and registered and doing a good job, it kind of hurts the industry as a whole that there are paid tax preparers out there that all get lumped in together and are doing shady things, or whether it's shady or just bad work. But I don't know when or if that will ever change.
Do you happen to know, historically, was there ever a time where there were some sort of like meaningful baseline requirements for education or experience, or was that never the case?
I don't know on the tax preparation side. I would imagine that it hasn't ever been the case for the most part in the accounting world. The regulations have just gotten more strict, as opposed to I can't think of really any examples of the requirements getting less strict.
Right. Yeah.
And every time a tax law changes, we just refer to that as job security. So
right. Yeah, I personally feel that there needs to be a beefing up of the requirements. It's just painfully, disgustingly low. Now, I'm not for Big Brother and excessive government. I think I'm fairly centrist, but this one area, because it hits close to home and I know what's involved and what's not involved in doing a tax return and kind of what you need to know to do one. It's just disgusting that the bar is so low that as long as you're an adult, not a felon, and current on your own taxes, that's it. You can do someone else's return for money, which is scary. Anyway.
Well, it is, but I mean, part of the problem is that you have CPAs, you have enrolled agents, just like any profession, that they themselves aren't doing a good job. I worked with an advisor earlier this year who their client's tax preparer had gone back and amended a previous year return to take credit for basically a deduction that was not passed into law for that year. Like it just clearly was not applicable to that year at all. There's this huge issue. And so the advisor was asking me for advice on how do I work with this CPA on how we get this resolved. So I kind of just gave him some ideas of how to proactively or constructively approach this CPA and just, help me understand what went on here. And the CPA's answer was, well, the software let me do it. And so this is a fully licensed tax preparer that's jumped over every hurdle that is out there. And they felt like their obligation ended at, well, the software let me do it. So
good.
Unfortunately,
quite the defense.
Unfortunately, something going through a software doesn't make it right. Unfortunately, just working with a licensed professional is not a golden ticket, although it can be a helpful place to start for vetting the people you're working with.
Yeah. Final comment. We'll wrap with this since it's on topic. The bar is likely so low because you are allowed to file your own return without any education, which is true.
You can also represent yourself in a court of law.
Right. Yeah. Good point.
So, there's a lot that goes into it. It's also, I think in part, it's also so low because everyone has to pay taxes. And so inherently, if you raise the bar, you're also going to raise the cost. And then the trade-off is you have more people doing it themselves and making mistakes and not getting and if somebody's doing it themselves, they almost guaranteed aren't getting the tax planning side of it. So there certainly isn't an easy answer to it.
That's great perspective. There rarely ever is an easy answer to any of this stuff. Life's far from black and white, unfortunately. All right. Well, that appears to be it for questions. We are a little over an hour, not too bad. Definitely thank you for joining, and for everyone listening, without question, check out the Retirement Tax Podcast. But you guys beat me to it. I probably should have started a podcast first with the words retirement and tax in the name, but good for you. No, you two of all people are the right two folks to be blending together retirement planning and tax planning. So I got nothing but the best wishes for you two in the podcast. So definitely check that out. Any parting words? Anything else you want to tell people? Where to go to find you, etc.?
The Retirement Tax Podcast is where I put out most of my consumer-facing content. And so, please check it out. Give us a 5-star review if you like it. Leave us comments, send us questions. We love answering listener questions as part of the podcast. We try to make it as applicable as we can. And my reminder to everyone is to remember to tip your server and not the IRS.
Great comment. How, if people want to get you questions, I feel like I should know the answer. Do you have like a video link on the podcast website, or do they email you, or how can they get that onto the podcast?
Oh, that's a great question. I'll have to go back and look. Like you said before, we're 6 episodes in, and so we're still building out website and things like that to go along with it. I mean, really, our primary goal with it is just to put great content out. So we don't have any catchy ways to grab everyone's email address. You're not going to get marketed anything from us. But I don't know off the top of my head if we have an email address. I assume we do. I know we have a domain. We have a website somewhere. So my production team is going to reprimand me for not knowing. But as far as finding the podcast, it's on Apple Podcasts, it's on Google Play, on Spotify, your typical places for finding podcasts.
Just looking now. So
I will find the answer from my team, and I can post it in the Facebook group.
Okay, but yeah, this I just want to show for everyone. Share my screen here. I kind of don't want to do that. Here we go. Here's these two handsome devils. Let me do this quickly. So I just did a quick screen share. I Googled Retirement Tax Podcast, and it'll take you to the Apple Podcast link for it. But just so you know, the cover art to look for, everyone. These two handsome devils here. They're Steve and Jarvis.
Hey, there I am.
And then Ben Brandt, as I mentioned, as you mentioned, he's the host of Retirement Starts Today Radio and also a member of the group. So this is a podcast you want to look for, a retirement tax podcast. There you go. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again, Stephen. Just stick around a second after I kill the stream, and we will touch base, post-mortem, etc.
Thanks for having me on, Andy. This has been a lot of fun.
Likewise. Thank you. All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you.